Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Kyle Shagnon. I'm part of the marketing team here at OpFocus. Today we'll be talking about optimizing your renewals with Salesforce CPQ. So before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the upcoming events that we have. The first of which is the Dashboard Dojo, which is hosted by our founder, David Carnes, and that's going to focus around digging into report types. He does these bi-monthly, and they're super valuable. I would highly recommend checking them out. On April 21st, we will be having a panel discussion focusing on nailing your next acquisition, talking about how to decide what to keep, what to ditch when consolidating tech stacks and bringing two organizations together. And finally, we will be attending the Forrester B2B Summit, which will take place on May 3rd through the 6th. We'll be having 2 sessions there. And if you are planning on attending, we would love to see you. So please drop it in the chat. We'd love to know who will be in attendance. So with that being said, we can get started with today's event. First of all, we welcome any questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If any questions come to mind, feel free to drop them in and we will try to discuss them as they come up. This session will be recorded as well, and you will receive a recording in an email after the session has ended. A couple of the topics that we are going to be talking about are all around Salesforce CPQ, specifically the key metrics that you should be tracking and how those should be used at your organization. Early renewals, when to use them, what they are, and best practices around those, and how to ensure good data quality, of course. Joining us today are Ben Bryer. He is from CentralReach, the Director of Business Operations, and we have David Movsesian, the Director of CPQ Consulting here at OpFocus. I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'll start. Good afternoon, everybody. I think some of you I may have met, but my name is Dave Movsesian. I'm the Director of CPQ Consulting. I've been with OpFocus since June of 2015. And I will just say prior to that, as you can tell by the gray hair, spent about 30 years out in the world in various positions: sales management, sales operations, business operations, and Salesforce administration before coming to OpFocus. So I'm not sure if everyone's titles are out there, but I've sat in a lot of your seats, and hopefully we can use that to our advantage in having this discussion. At OpFocus, we started our Salesforce CPQ practice at the end of 2015, and I was glad to lead it, having had some experience before that. We've done 50-some Salesforce CPQ implementations since then, and learned a lot. So hoping to share some of that, and I'll hand it off to Ben to introduce himself.
Thanks, Dave. Ben Bryer, the Senior Director of Business Operations at CentralReach. I've been working in business operations for about 7 years, and before that, sales operations, so nice transition for me. I've been using Salesforce for about 12 years. I actually came into it through the support end, which I know isn't the normal path, but very much live all aspects of it. I've worked with Dave for a few years now, and CPQ has probably been something I've been working with the past 2 years, but something I've wanted to use for longer, back when it was SteelBrick, and Aptus was the other tool that I've kind of experienced with. And we've definitely been fans of it. It's fit a lot of needs we've had. It's filled in a lot of gaps that we've had over time. So I'm always excited to talk about this and how it's kind of driven our business forward, and especially the insight it's given us that has been difficult to manage in the past.
And I will say that when I joined OpFocus in 2015, I think Ben was one of my first clients.
I believe so.
We were doing a Service Cloud implementation at the time with another company, and as I transitioned into this role, he was one of the first people I said, you all should be using CPQ. So we finally got to work together on it.
Yeah.
And, glad to do so. So I want to talk about a few things here today, and I do have some slides for the purpose of illustrating this conversation, especially when we talk about the key metrics, and then something that was near and dear to the hearts of some folks recently on a forum about early renewals and what that looks like, and how we can configure that to make that a little simpler for everyone. So I will share some slides in a bit. around that. So we're going to talk about starting it off with renewals and some of the key metrics to measure, and then I'll talk about what some of those are that we generally configure for our clients, and I want Ben's going to chime in about what he's done with that information and even expanded on it. So let's dive in. Actually, I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me for one moment. All right. So the topics we'll be discussing, the key metrics, how to process early renewals. We have a recommended method for that. I think might be of interest. And then some considerations around data quality and ensuring through some data governance and some business processes that we're maintaining the quality of the data that we're going to be talking about here. So real important that we wrap a process around all of this. It doesn't just magically happen. So I want to start with a couple of things. I threw this slide in here mainly because this is a subject that comes up when we engage with clients frequently, in that they've lived in a world without CPQ and managed to find workarounds for things. And typically there are a couple of things that pop up that we need to, I hate to say rip out, but that is one of the considerations. The first one that comes up a lot is in order to get to things like what was my expansion, my upsells, my cross-sells, my renewals. Frequently they use things like different opportunity types, or even more so different opportunity record types. And that's something that, as I like to say, is one of the things that CPQ helps to fix. It's not something we would want to perpetuate. So when we're talking about this, the key thing here to understand is that all of the things, metrics we're going to be talking about really are at the line level. So we want to make sure that we don't put a lot of restrictions at the opportunity level that might cause us to have multiple transactions, which we don't need. It's more work for the reps. It's not as comfortable for your clients. So we want to try to eliminate that. So everything you see that we're going to talk about here is done at the line level. That's going to be really important going forward. The other thing that happens is a lot of times they have reps classifying line items or transactions as this is an upsell deal, or this is a cross-sell deal, or this is an expansion deal. And it's manual, and everybody knows what happens when you have users manually making decisions like that that are going to affect your reporting. It just doesn't work. So with rare exceptions, we try to make everything, configure everything so it's automated. Those are the things we're going to be talking about here today. Ben, I think you had some experience with that second one, especially the manual class.
I've had experience with all of this, and I'm sure a lot of people have, and I think it's a good point. When you lean on the opportunity type, that header level to track everything, you're going to go down a path. You end up doing multiple opportunity records for one deal that you have to enforce or linked, or all sorts of validation rules you have to put on the representatives that just cause data errors and frustration, frankly. And yes, then you do have to have weekly, monthly checks by a sales ops team to make sure everything's been entered properly. Sometimes you have to resend contracts to clients because things were done, and it's just a horrible situation. I think that something we'll go through here is the fact that you don't need to do multiple deals to track all of this. You can all contain it in one deal. There is no resending of anything to clients. There's much less data cleanup. And I think the freedom you get with this is that the opportunity object becomes where the sales team can basically put the details about their process, their discovery. It's a house for that. The quotes and the line levels just feed the rest of the information. They don't have to worry about it anymore. They just structure their deal, track what they need to, that they can feed other teams with, be it implementation or success. And it's just a much easier path for everybody. And selfishly on the ops end, we don't have to watch as much down the line.
For those of you who have CPQ now, you know that you'll be swimming in data, is the way I put it. There's so much data, and the key here is how do we configure it in a way that you can trust the data, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. So I wanted to talk about some of the typical metrics. These are the things that just out of the gate I will usually configure for my clients, and our team does this as well. So just some things to consider. Now, what I will say, I want to take you through some of these, but what I will say is we started here for Ben and CentralReach, and Ben and one of his mad scientist ops guys have taken it to the next level from there. So I do want to get into that in a minute. I want to start with the basics, but then I want Ben to be able to talk about how they've used that as a stepping stone to take it to the next level. So the first thing is on every subscription line, we'll calculate MRR and frankly ARR. ARR being MRR times 12. That's a done deal. So we calculate our MRR for every single quote line, and then we can put that into buckets based on criteria around the deal. If it's a new business transaction, then it's all new business ARR or MRR. So that's an easy one. Then you get into the things like expansion, contraction, add-on, churn, right? And those are treated a little differently on amendments versus renewals. Kind of explain that a little bit. So expansion and contraction, just sort of the yin and yang of change of an existing subscription. So if I'm amending or renewing an existing subscription, any increase can go into that expansion bucket, any decrease can go into the contraction bucket. I do have clients that just do a net expansion number. It could be positive or negative and not split into two buckets. I think we started there for the CentralReach folks, and then decided it was visually just something that was more helpful to have it divided into two buckets. So that is always any increase or decrease, whether it's a change in price, a change in discount on a renewal, an increase or decrease in quantity, anything that changes the value of a quote line that's tied to an existing subscription. Expansion, contraction. I'm using terminology that's sort of my default terminology. Whenever we implement this for someone, we go through this exercise and we take the definitions and we'll use whatever words you want to use in your organization. So you'll see that the next one, add-on, Ben and his team defined it as cross-sell. So the add-on MRR is on any amendment or renewal when I'm adding something the client didn't previously own, anything that's not tied to an existing subscription, something brand new. That's my add-on MRR. So I'm calculating all this and putting it into individual buckets. And I'll show you some screenshots about what that looks like in the system. And then churn, obviously, if we take an existing subscription line and on an amendment or renewal, reduce the quantity to 0, client doesn't want it anymore as of a certain date or as of their renewal, we'll classify that as churn. So we have churn at the line level. So this is where I get into, I'll touch on the last two in a moment, but this is where we get into that conversation about why we don't want separate opportunities or opportunity types, or separate, I should just say separate transactions to do my add-on versus my expansion versus my churn, which I see in kind of the pre-CPQ world. Because many of these things can happen on a single deal. On an amendment, you could have some expansion, some contraction, some churn, some add-on, right? And the same thing on a renewal. On a renewal, just to touch on this last piece, and then I'm going to pass to Ben for a moment. We also need to understand how much of the MRR on the renewal is just carryover, right, from the prior term, and how much of it is expansion. On an amendment, amendments in CPQ are all about delta. Any value on any quote line is just the incremental value, up or down. So we don't have to worry about what was it worth previously to calculate expansion and contraction. It's all expansion, contraction, add-on, or churn. That's all it is. It's all an amendment is. So we don't care. But when we get into the renewal side of things, we have to know what was the MRR or ARR for the previous term. What is it now? And that's the renewed subscription MRR. What was it for the previous term? The renewed MRR is how much of that did we actually renew? So if you had $1,000 of MRR previously and you renewed 800 of it because you reduced the quantity or gave a discount, your renewed MRR was 800, and $200 would fall into the contraction bucket. Okay, so we have it all accounted for. Same thing if you increase the quantity or increase the value of the line, we'd say it was $1,000 of renewed MRR and some other incremental uplift in expansion. So we always have every dollar accounted for when we're looking at the amendments and the renewals. The renewals, we have that one additional factor to consider. And I kind of want to go to Ben for a second here and have him give from the business side. I've been giving you the consultant side. From the business side, the things that you were looking for and what you got from this.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why we had to split deals before. You know, we would want to split out the negative and the positive, tie the deals together and get the net. We don't have to do that anymore. This all lives on one deal. It's all generated by the lines. The nice thing is, even while the rep's building the deal in the quote, and I know we'll show some examples of that later, they could see the movement while they're fashioning the deal. They know what the profitability of the deal is. So the reps have a little bit more in mind on, is this deal making money for the company? Is it losing money? How do I have to talk about this to people? The beautiful thing is having all this on the line, you could have 4 expansion lines, and some of what Dave was talking about, we roll all this up on the header level, on the opportunity. So if there's 4 expansion lines, great, we can do the breakout of those, and then we can also do the roll up on the whole deal. I can give you the total expansion. The nice thing we can really do from here is, the best thing is, we know what we're doing in the renewal. Is it a net positive? Is it a net negative deal? Is it moving the client forward? Are they receding a bit from us? If they are, is that something we have to manage with a success team? It gives us a lot of information about the client just based on them selling. And the fact that this all rolls up, no one has to touch the information. It's all being read through Salesforce. They just adjust quantity and price. It's spoon-fed for us. It's easy to report on. It's easy for leadership to see quickly. You can look at an opportunity. We have all of these roll-ups in one section. They could see the profitability right away. And if they want to dig into why it went down, they could see product churn items. They could see reduction items. It's very clear. It's very easy. And what Dave was saying, we did have expansion all in one bucket, but why not break it out and make it easier for people? So, you know, the end goal of everything we're doing here is to make reporting as simple and easy as possible. And the fact that it's all automated from the contracts means it's reliable, because it's not manual input or someone guessing. They were contracted for this, they changed it to this, it's now worth this. It's just been very easy for us to work with.
Now, I will say, in working with Ben, we deployed these changes last year. I forget when.
About May, I think.
Yeah. And I had a phone call, I think, with your ops guy, RJ, and about 3 days after we deployed, I called him and said, how's everything going? And his response was, we're putting out fires left and right. I said, well, wait a minute, we tested this, it works great. He goes, no, it's not the CPQ stuff. It's just, we now have visibility into things we didn't have before. And we're finding all these processes that weren't followed, or data that wasn't complete. And it's exposing things about the organization that we didn't know before. So I don't know, Ben, if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And renewals were a huge part of that. The fact is that renewals were done manually. So they were able to put whatever they wanted to and just remove items if they wanted to, literally just delete the lines. That can't happen anymore. So we started seeing what the value of these renewals are, what moving to new items did for them, how they acted amongst segment, really. So we'd see that, you know, clients of a certain segment, when they renewed, it went a certain way. A lot of the behavior came out through that, and a lot of the sales performance. So it did have a shift in how we were selling some things. It did tell us we should have discount thresholds that we might not have had in place before, so we could kind of protect the revenue at the time of renewal. It was so quickly seen, to Dave's point, as soon as people started processing these, that we were able to change things within the first month of this happening. Frankly, we were even able to iron out the attainment for the reps. So it even gave clarity there. I mean, they really knew what they were cross-selling. We really knew what the performance was. While initially that was scary to people, as Dave was mentioning, I think they grew to appreciate it because it was so clear and in your face. But it did cause us to change how we were having the reps process these deals and what they should be looking for to doing them.
I will say, and I don't want to put words in Ben's mouth because I can't say whether this was you folks or someone else, but I have seen instances where without this level of visibility, and suddenly having this visibility and saying, hey, we're losing money on these deals, or we're at least there was a reduction on the renewal, and having people scratch their head and say, wait a minute, we paid the reps on this
Yes.
renewal, but they actually lost money for the company because of some, we didn't have visibility into that. Now, I don't know, Ben, if that was true for
That's
you.
the attainment I'm talking about. Yeah, we would say, oh, wow, you sold them this new product. We're going to pay you X on this. Great job. And hold on. That's great that they sold that, but we also lost $300 overall on the deal. So it did force us to revisit those things. But honestly, while that was part of what initially caused some fear with reps, I think they all kind of took it in stride and were able to craft the deals with a little more thought. It's probably made them better at contracting clients. But that was a little bit of the worry, Dave. You're right.
Before I move on to the next slide, there are a couple questions coming in, and I do want to touch on this, at least one of them that seems to be the appropriate spot. First one, Pablo asked, why is it churn only if the quantity is reduced to 0? What about partial reduction, let's say from 10 to 7? So this is the standard implementation we do, and this is certainly how Ben and his team classified things. And the way that churn is calculated is it's a complete churn of the product. They completely drop the product. They don't want it anymore. That's how we classify churn. The reduction is in either contraction, if you split it out into this, so you know that there was a reduction, but it wasn't actual churn, or we can do expansion. Now, that being said, we can adapt this to anyone. So if you tell me that you want any negative expansion or any contraction to show in the churn bucket, that can be done too. So just keep in mind, what we're talking about is our more standard approach, how I typically do this, but it always starts with a conversation, as I mentioned, where we sit down with these definitions and talk about, well, what do you call it when we do this? So if we got to a conversation about that, you might say, well, any reduction, any contraction, we want to call churn. Great. That's the importance of having that discovery session, that conversation up front, so that we can adapt this. This is just what we're showing you here is what we typically implement, but certainly it's very adaptable. The other question I had said, how would you suggest companies move from the model of assigning MRR at an opportunity line level versus historically splitting types of MRR into separate ops? That's usually a bunch of cleanup work that we got to do. Ultimately, the important thing to understand is the only way you can determine if something is expansion or contraction, or in many cases add-on systematically, is you have to have a reference to the prior subscription to compare it to. So in the absence of something like CPQ that does that, it's challenging to go back to your legacy data and try to categorize all of this. Extremely challenging. So certainly if you have your lines that are already classified in a certain way because they existed on a certain type of op, there's some data transformation that could be done. I'm speaking real generally right now because I'm not promising you anything. We'd have to look at data to understand that. But if you've been able to classify your transactions in a way to say everything on this is an add-on, we can probably go back and do something with your legacy data to do that. But on a going forward basis, the important thing is that everything you see here, as far as the exception of new business, is based on a link to a prior subscription. And that's the key here in CPQ. That kind of leads me into my next slide. The on quote lines in CPQ, there is a reference back. There's two fields, and these are just repeated here just for the purpose of this visual. There's a field for a renewed subscription and a field called upgraded. I always call it amended subscription. And that's the link back. You can see that there's a lookup value in the ones below. That's the link back to the prior subscription. It gives us access to all the data on that subscription. So with that lookup, we can exchange information between the prior subscription and the new quote line to say, what was the value of this? What was the quantity? What was the MRR or ARR or uplifted, right? We didn't talk about uplifted MRR, ARR that we want to use to compare to the new quote line. So just, this is my little matrix that I think simplifies this, is that if both of those fields are blank, meaning it's not linked to a prior subscription, Well, on a new business quote, everything is new business, so we don't care, right? It's never going to be linked to a subscription. And if you're doing a new business quote, it's all new business, right? If you're doing an amendment, that means it's an add-on because there's no reference to a prior subscription. This is something new. Same thing on a renewal. And when you get into the next one, where we're talking about the upgraded subscription having a reference, it's not relevant on a new business. It's not going to happen. Actually, I got my things backwards, don't I? Sorry about that. Upgraded subscription is actually the bottom middle cell. It's an amended subscription that can result in expansion, contraction, or churn. My apologies for the error on the slide. So if I reference an upgraded subscription on an amendment, it means that anything I do to that line on the amendment is going to result in expansion or contraction or churn. Okay. And the inverse down at the bottom should be on my renewed subscription. Anything I do to that line is going to be expansion, contraction, or churn. And I also have to factor in the value of the MRR to know how much of this was renewed MRR. And I will tell you that there's more to this. I mentioned you can gather a lot of information from the subscription. I once had a client who said they talked about the renewal price increase, and I said, define that for me. And they said, whatever the price was on the renewal compared to what the price was on the prior subscription. And I said, well, okay, what if the quantity increases and the price decreases because I gave them a big discount? And what if the inverse happens? What if both go up? What if both go down? How are we accounting for that? So we haven't done this with Ben. I can see Ben's wheels are turning right now. Because we can tell you also how much of that expansion was because you increased quantity or reduced the discounts or increased the price. How much of that contraction was because you reduced quantity or reduced price? Because we can identify what was the unit price per, right, on the subscription. Did that go up? Did that go down? What was the delta of the unit price? Was the quantity increased or decreased? So we can take this to a much finer level than we've done. And I think Ben's going to have more work for me next week. But this is the foundation of it. This information right here, despite the fact that I edited my slide 5 minutes before this thing and flipped them, is the key. The links back to the prior subscription. Okay. And
funny, Dave, we're actually doing some of that through reporting, but yeah, I'm sure we're gonna want to build it in. We go off the MRR changing, and that basically is what dictates it, be it either through price or quantity. Yeah. The fact that we just know it's happening is big, but we are actually able to do that through some reporting with subscriptions, thankfully.
But this is what I talk about when we say we're swimming in data. Right? We've got access to all of this information, and the key here, and I do want to, before I show you some screenshots, the key here, we talked about maintaining data quality, maintaining data integrity, and this is crucial. When you implement CPQ, for those of you who have done it, you understand this. For those of you who haven't done it, it's important to understand this, that following process is extremely important. I see all of this well thought out configuration, all of this well thought out, these calculations, put at risk because organizations do these one-off special deals where, well, we did this as a new business, but we want to call it a renewal. Well, you broke all your connections, so you can't do that. So the importance of following process once you do this, because if you break with process, if you break with the standard process, you're very possibly going to break all those linkages. So it's really important that you do your amendments as amendments, you do your renewals as renewals in a prescribed way. All right, because that's when things can really go south on you. And Ben, chime in anytime you want. But
yeah, I actually saw there's a comment that there's a lot of discovery to get this right. There is, and not all of it is what data I want to look at. I think this is a really important point. The restrictions you put in the system are just as important, or you're going to have a problem. I think when you're working on this, you really have to work with sales leadership and the team in defining what the processes fit them. And what the restrictions would hold them back from doing, and really understand that up front. If you're going to say, I can't do this kind of deal and amendment, then make sure you have that built in there. I would say along with that, you can only restrict so much through a system. You should think about some governance reports while you're launching this and have those at the ready, just as much as you're thinking about the reports you're going to be able to produce for leadership. And I think without that, you're going to immediately run into problems because people are going to try to work through the system and this stuff breaks and your data is no longer reliable. And then you've built a Frankenstein. And I think that's something everyone has to avoid. So it's worth the time up front in really understanding what the process is going to be, because you have to lay this out very cleanly to the team. It's a little bit of putting the sales team on rails, but you'll find that they appreciate that more than you think. There's always small ways to get around things. And once they're on that kind of rail, you might have some of the exceptions kind of thought out with your ops team, your Salesforce team. And there'll be little levers they can pull to still do things, but keep it within, you know, the prescribed process. But I can't stress the importance of this enough. I mean, if it's not done right and you don't have those validation rules or whatever it might be in place, you know, it's going to be a lot of work for nothing, unfortunately.
Ben talks about putting sales reps on rails. I talk about putting up guardrails. Right? We want them to understand they have some movement in between. We give them some creative flexibility, but there's limits to that, and that's what we put those guardrails.
I do that to Dave all the time. I need a lever or two here and there. Yeah. Let's build it in up front so we know it's coming. But that, again, working with leadership and understanding what they need to do to get deals in.
Ben's configuration is definitely an evolution. We've been working together now for about 1.5 years, I think, on this and various, you know, just on CPQ in general, just continually tuning. The other one was, Ben had alluded to this before, you know, we put systematic stopgaps in place to prevent the deleting of quote lines that reference an amendment or a subscription, right? We talked about something being recognized as churn because we reduced the quantity down to 0. And what we would typically see is that users, if somebody said, I don't want to renew that, would delete the line, yes. Which means you've lost all connection, you've lost all reportability of that MRR. You can certainly go back to subscriptions and say how many of these were renewed, but if the line just got deleted, you lose sight of that. So we, you know, systematically, CPQ is real good about enforcing it on the amendment side. You can't just delete. We can say that you can't delete the line, but we've done some custom work on a couple of things. One was on the renewal to prevent a user from deleting any line that references a renewed subscription. Can't do it. And it basically throws up an error message as can't delete that. You got to reduce it to 0 if they don't want to renew it. And that gives you the churn value. That's important because otherwise you're going to have gaps all over the place. So, you know, that's a custom thing that we do just to enforce that. For those of you who are familiar with working, whether in CPQ or not, you notice that, you know, on the line level, opportunity products or quote lines, when you're looking at related lists, they can do the edit and delete. And you can't take that away because users have to have permissions to edit or delete. That's how CPQ works. It's constantly writing to those things. And we have to prevent that, right? We have to prevent them from doing that. Any changes need to be made within CPQ. The third bullet, we calculate everything on the quote line. That's the way I do it. Right? We calculate everything on the quote line and pass that down at the line level to the opportunity product and the subscriptions, right? So there's this constant flow. And by the way, back from the subscriptions to the quote lines when we do the amendment or renewal, all the data flows. And that's why it's important to have those linkages. For those of you who know CPQ, there's this thing called field twinning that I wish was elsewhere in Salesforce that allows us to just have fields that if you name them the same thing, they're the same type, just to pass the information from one field to the next without having to do all kinds of, you know, flows and workflows and things. So it's a beautiful thing to see the data just move. The last thing I will say is MDQ. I will say that of the 5+ years we've been doing CPQ, we've had a pretty good run at talking people out of this, but that has come to an end. It seems like everybody we talk to now, I do all the scoping on deals now for OpFocus for CPQ, and it seems like everybody wants MDQ. And MDQ is the ability to ramp a deal, right? To say in year 1, you're going to have 100 of these. In year 2, we're going to grow to 200. In year 3, we're going to grow to 300. And I won't get into all the details of this. I'll just say that There is a business reason to be able to do this. If you show this feature, demo this feature to your salespeople, they're all going to want it. Your sales managers are going to want it. And then we'll show what that does to your underlying data, and your ops people will say, no way, we don't want this. There's a lot of extra work that goes into all of the things we've been talking about, and frankly, some limitations if you implement CPQ, MDQ. So love MDQ on a new business transaction, but there are serious implications when you get into the amendment and renewal side if you implement that, as far as what this data needs to look like, and some transformation you have to do, and frankly, like I said, some limitations as far as how it rolls up and how it communicates between the quote line and the subscription. So if you think in MDQ, let's have a conversation about that at some point. Ben, anything?
Yeah, I know MDQ is something we worked through a little bit, and it was a challenge with some of the subtypes. In our business, it turned out that it wasn't as relevant. So I know there is some give and take there, and we just didn't go down that path. I do want to, the third bullet point here, that's been huge for us. I mean, the nicest thing about the fact that everything's on the line is I could give monthly reports on all of our expansion broke out. I could give monthly reports on all of our churn broken out, any kind of breakout. So the fact that it's on the line level, you can do any kind of layer of reporting with that. You could roll things up, you could break them down, you could say what products are doing what on a monthly basis. That's actually been huge for our products team. So when new products come out or existing ones have some significant changes, they can see what that's doing in the sales world. Are people increasing the usage? Are they taking it down? Are they dropping it? Are more people adding it? It's been invaluable for the product team. Again, one of those consequences you don't always think about since this is so catered for sales, but it's given a lot of insight to other parts of the company. And frankly, the contracts and subscriptions alone have been massive. I mean, if anyone's worked with Salesforce without it, how do you look in an account and know what they have is always a question. And this is a bit of the answer. And I won't get into it too much, but I mean, it opens the door to white space reporting and really gets the team to know where they have to attack. So it all comes from that quote line. That MRR on the quote line, those subtypes there are the genesis of all of that. So I just can't stress the importance of that enough.
I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure I make time for one of the other topics. So I'm going to, pardon if I jump through a couple slides here. I want to get to a slide that where I sum up some of the things that we just talked about on the renewal. So this is, oops, there it is. So this is a screenshot from a renewal. And I kind of jumped past the amendment and all the other processes, but wanted you to see some of the buckets that are happening here that we've actually displayed on the screen. So we've got a renewal where the first line was originally 100 and we increased it from 100 to 150. We didn't change the price any, but you'll see that shows up here as an incremental expansion for that. We have a second line that I think went from 150 down to 0, and that was my churn, and that's showing up in my churn bucket. And then we added a new line that is showing up in my cross-sell. It's just an add-on, what I labeled as add-on, these folks call cross-sell. So this is my add-on business. So I can look at this and know that my total MRR on this deal was 18,967. My renewed subscriptions, what I brought in at the beginning of this was 9,555. So I doubled the size of this deal, right? But in the course of doing that, I increased a quantity of something, I churned something, and I added a new line. So I've got all the buckets. I know where everything came from, and I can really dig in on this. And as I said, earlier, we can go a step further if we want to look at what caused that expansion, right? Not just what line, but did we grow the quantity? Did we grow the price? Did we reduce discount? What did we do? Okay.
And the nice thing is this is all on the quote creation screen. So the rep, they're entering the quantity, the discount, adding items. That's it. They're seeing everything happen while they're kind of going through there and doing quick saves or whatever they might prefer. It's just been really eye-opening to them too, that they have it right there and they don't have to actually do much.
I do see some questions that I think I may need to follow up after. My comments on MDQ seem to be spurring some action. I think that would be a great topic, some of these things for a future, a follow-up discussion. I don't think I can do it justice in this conversation, but for those of you who are putting that in, Kyle, if you can capture some of the names, I can maybe follow up in a separate discussion. But there was I want to jump into a separate topic here quickly that we talked about, which is early renewal. And this came up, this has come up a number of times recently. I think it was, well, actually, no, I know it was Ben and his team that originally said, here's our requirement, what do we do? And kind of came to a design on that I wanted to share. Subsequently, as I said, just about every deal I scope for a client, this comes up. And it recently came up on a forum, and I shared this and just wanted to go spend a few minutes on this to talk about it, because it does seem to affect a lot of people, and there's a pretty simple solution to it.
And I want to say my ops team actually runs point on maintaining this, and it's no issue for them. I mean, they have easiest time with it.
We talk about process definition and strictly adhering to process. And one of the questions I ask in a scoping call is, will we be enforcing co-termination and proration on all amendments? Because that's goodness, right? We want that. Typically what I hear is, yes, well, most of them. All right. And that, well, most of them I hear as no. All right. And that means work. That means additional configuration, additional risks to security and permissions and things like that to try to deal with that, which I will not get into right now. But when we dig into the two reasons for why they don't want to enforce co-termination on amendments, not that this is an amendment discussion, but you'll see why I'm going here. Two reasons. The first of which is a horrible reason, and the second which is a perfectly understandable reason that we're going to go to. First reason was reps get paid more money if they don't co-term. Okay. That is the worst reason I can think of to not enforce co-termination of amendments, right? If you're saying the rep, if he sells for a full year, he's going to get paid more, even though it's a benefit to the organization to co-term it, a benefit to the customer to co-term it and have one end date. You can't recognize the revenue as an organization beyond that anyway, so it doesn't do you any good to have that. You'll see it as a bookings, but that's what the sales guys are looking for, right? The rest of the organization knows there's really no benefit to it. So anytime the reason to make a change to the way you transact your business is because this is how our commission plan works, immediately take that off the table. That doesn't fly. And I will tell you that from my years in Salesforce administration too. That was never a good reason. That was the best reason to change things. Second reason is this one, which is sometimes in the middle of a contract, we need to make changes where we say we want to sell something at a different price. We want to expand the term of the deal, right? And yes, there are some dials in CPQ that allow you to do that, to basically bypass co-termination. There are some pitfalls in doing that. I'm not saying everyone will hit that, but the best practice is enforce co-termination on 100% of your amendment deals. However, this one is true, right? In the middle of a contract, you need to renegotiate. And what most people will tell you, including Salesforce, if I talk to someone at Salesforce, traditionally what that is a pretty simple process. It's a termination and a rebook. And what that means is I do an amendment to take everything down to zero as of a certain date. And then I process a new transaction to say, here's what you're going to own going forward. Here's the problem with that. As soon as I amend it and take everything down to zero, my only option is to enter a new business deal. All right. We just talked a minute ago about how everything in your organization depends upon having those linkages back to the subscription. And when you do a new business deal, you've lost all of that. Everything looks like an add-on. Everything looks like a complete churn and a complete add-on, when in fact, this is a renewal, right? This is a continuation under different terms for your customer. You want to be able to visualize that. You want to be able to see that in your data. So Ben and his team came to me and said, here's the problem. Here's what we need to do. And I came back and said, okay, this works, but let's flip it on its head. All right. And so for those of you who implement this, because I know there was some positive reaction on the forum recently, and I implement this on just about every deal, every company I do, it was Ben and his team that spurred this and the thought on this, and now it's a no-brainer. So what we do instead now is we renew first and then we terminate. So let me talk to that for a second. If I have an existing contract, let's say from January 1st to December 31st, in the middle of the year, they come back and say, we want to renegotiate. We want you to charge us a different rate for something. We want to extend the length of this thing. We want to completely change everything up. Something that's beyond a typical amendment where I'm just increasing or decreasing quantity or adding a new product and co-terminating. We want to change things up. We would do a renewal and say, all right, let's take the existing renewal opportunity that's on this contract, use that, create a quote. The quote will say, okay, the renewal start date is the 1st of next year. We're going to say, yeah, but we're going to pull it up to June. And we're going to renegotiate. We'll say, hey, look, I'll give you all these special, special pricing, whatever, but I want you to commit to a 2-year or 3-year deal, right? We're going to extend the commitment in exchange for this, which is, again, why you can't just do an amendment. We do the renewal. Every one of those renewal quote lines relates back to my subscriptions now, right? I do my renewal, I win my deal, and I've got a new contract. Now, here's the thing. I now have a contract that runs through the end of this year and a new contract that started in June of this year. I've got 6 months of overlap that I need to get rid of. And so that's when I do the terminate. I do the amendment on the first contract to slice off those transactions, to slice off those subscriptions as of the renewal start date. And that way I can do a couple of things. One, on the renewal, I have all my linkages back. I know this is a renewal. I can count it as expansion, contraction, churn. And on the amendment, I know, because I've already closed my renewal deal, that these are a termination due to early renewal. They can all be classified that way. It's not a strict termination. I keep referring back to this form, but that was somebody's comment about you need to be able to identify amendments that were done to terminate subscriptions because they were just dropping a product versus amendments that were done to terminate a subscription because they renewed early, right? And by having done the renewal, we can do that. And Ben, if you want to speak to this at all, I'm going to show a couple slides, but I want to make sure you have a chance to speak to what this is.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to point out one nice business benefit of this has been, we've actually been able to put rules around amendments in that if you're changing the list price of a certain product, that necessitates a renewal, which has worked out for the reps because we're actually able to, as Dave was alluding, extend contracts when they ask for these things rather than just amending something and letting it ride out, then having that conversation again. Because we've been able to do this, I don't have to do that. The amendments become very much just a vehicle for cross-sell and then possibly some expansion. But once anything gets to anything else, they now have a nice lever to like, you know what, let's just renew them. And half the time they want to go longer because they get a more favorable rate up front. And this has just been a very easy method to do that. And like I said before, the maintenance of it is not complicated. So I know, Dave, you're going to show it right now, but it's been nice in that it's given us the amendment path's been very clear. Like they don't have questions, do I amend or renew? It's been answered for the reps. They know what to do now. So
the key difference here, anytime we do this, understand there are 2 transactions. And when you do, this is why this approach works so much better, aside from the data flow. All right, let's talk about the user experience for a second. If you do a terminate and rebook, you're doing 2 transactions. The terminate is easy, but now you're building a new transaction. You have to recreate everything that they own from scratch, right? So not only is your data going to be wrong because it's not a new business transaction, but the time it takes for a rep to rebuild it line by line. Okay, that's one of the key things. So we know there's going to be 2 transactions, but the terminate and rebook is just so much more work. All right, and I know a lot of people have struggled with that in the past, and that's where this forum question came up, was that's a painful process. So what we do is we take the pain out of this. And this sounds like, hey, we're still doing 2 transactions. The flipping of this makes a big difference. And in about the 4 minutes I have left, I want to take you through this real quick. So understand, we start with the contract, right? We've got a contract, we've got a renewal opportunity. I'm going to go through this a little quickly, but I'll point out the key points. And then frankly, this is about how long it takes to do this. We just create the renewal, right? The renewal quote. And traditionally, it's by checking a box. There's workflows, different things you might want to do to do that behind the scenes. But we create a renewal quote for the existing renewal opportunity. When that gets created, it has the default start date, right? 1/1/2022, and all my products on there. I don't have to rebuild it, right? This is my renewal, and everything is linked back to my subscriptions. Now, as a user, I go in and say, okay, we're going to renew this at 6 months early. We're going to do it on 6/1, 7 months early, I guess that is. But in exchange for giving you a 10% discount, I'm going to extend this out to 24 months. All right. Now, obviously, this is probably the most time-consuming part of this process, the negotiation, right? What do they want? Arriving at the right price and quantities and terms. That's the time-consuming part, not the clicks. So we do that, and then we will save win it, right? We'll save win that deal, and on the original contract, obviously when we do that, that creates a new contract for a new term. That's out there. That starts now in 6/1, which is a future date right now, but we have some information that we collect back on the original contract to say, okay, the renewal op has been closed early, it closed one early. Good, we know that. The renewal start date was 6/1, right? And the renewal op has been contracted, right? So we collect some data just based on the person processing and close winning that opportunity. Next thing we do is there's this little checkbox that this is what we did for the folks at CentralReach because they wanted a chance to look at it and then do this cleanup. So your renewal's done, the new term is defined, we've got that, contracts in the system starting on 6/1. Now we deal with the overlap. And what the folks at CentralReach want to do is have somebody in ops actually eyeball it. So we don't even ask the rep to do this, right? Or CentralReach doesn't ask the rep to do this. Reps don't, all right? Now what it does is it shows up on a list or flags the ops guy and say, hey, you need to process a termination for early renewal. All right. Again, we could probably automate this, and Ben will start now asking me to do that next week. But what we do here is we just classify this as a terminate for early renewal. This was the most basic form of it to try this out because, again, friends at CentralReach were the guinea pigs on this one. So we said, okay, let's do a termination for early renewal, and then we click amend, right? And it opens up my renewal, my amendment renewal quote, right? Well, I'm sorry, my amendment quote, sorry. And notice what it did. It said, let me change the start date to 6/1 because the contract passed that. As soon as we said this is going to be a termination for early renewal, the contract said, hey, here's the early renewal date, which I already know. And any subscriptions that are on this, change them to 0. So I basically, for these folks, I go into the screen, the work is done, I save it, I close win it, and I'm done. All right, piece of cake. So I come back here and I can see what I would see today is I'd see my subscriptions. Now, by the way, these are still active because they go through 5/30, right? The renewal date 6/1. These are still active subscriptions, but we did terminate, these are going to have offsetting terminations that start on 6/1. So as of 6/1, all of this is inactive. The new contract kicks in. And as I mentioned, there's a bit of a screenshot from one of the subscriptions. I know that this particular subscription is currently active, but will become inactive because it was an early renewal termination date of 5/31. It will be terminated for early renewal, and I can classify this different from a simple churn. Okay, so pretty easy steps. I'm going to probably pause there. Kyle's looking at me because I told him I would shut up at about 5 minutes till. I know there's a lot of questions, a lot we want to talk about, and I'm happy to entertain those offline with anybody. I wanted you to see what was possible. These are a couple of things that we've done for CentralReach that we're now implementing for a lot of people, and it's creating a lot of efficiencies for folks. So Ben, just maybe take a minute to sum up your experience, and I'll hand it back to Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this has just been a weekly report that my team runs. They look through it. If there's anything in there, they check it over, assuming everything's right. We've actually haven't run into, no, knock on wood, we haven't run into any problems with this, but they run the report weekly. They do the cleanup that they need to do. I mean, it's a pretty quick process. And again, I think the key is the reps don't have to deal with this. It's never client facing. And it's easy to keep out of reporting. So I'm sure now that you've said it, Dave, we could probably automate some of this, but for now it's been a pretty painless manual process on my team's end that I have not heard one complaint about. In fact, they were very happy to have it in place. And I think actually the little sanity check on these things rather than having it automated, it's been nice too.
Stop for share here. And Kyle, take it away.
Thank you both. Thank you, David, and thank you, Ben, for your insights. I know I learned a ton, and I'm sure everyone on the line did as well. I did want to thank everyone for joining us, and we do have a couple of upcoming events if you would like to join us again. The first is the Dashboard Dojo, which is run by our founder, David Carnes. He does bi-weekly webinars on all things Salesforce, really diving into reports, dashboards, and in this case, report types. We also have an upcoming panel discussion around nailing your acquisition. That'll be with Linda Sermons, the Senior Project Manager at Seismic, Frank Davis, the SVP of Sales Operations at Emburse, our very own Jim Parker, Senior Growth Advisor with OpFocus, and David Carnes moderating. And we will also be at the Forrester B2B Summit. We will be presenting 2 case studies, one with Seismic and one with Sisense. So if you're going to be there, we would love to connect, and we're always looking to meet up with folks so we know. So I want to again thank everyone for coming. Again, thank you for sharing your knowledge, David and Ben.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.